Film historians tell us that at the birth of the film industry, about 1898 to about 1914, the church actually produced more movies than Hollywood did.
That's amazing.
Early on, the church was extraordinarily active in making feature film. Montclair, New Jersey, right across the Hudson from New York City, they were doing some remodeling. And when they blew out a back wall of the sanctuary, they discovered a giant 35 millimeter vintage film projector embedded in the wall.
All right, welcome to Talk to Transform podcast. I am very excited about today's guest, Phil Cooke from Cooke Pictures. He's a media producer, writer, speaker, and coach. He's the founder and CEO of Cooke Media Group in Los Angeles. Phil's produced media program in nearly 70 countries and has created many of the most influential, inspirational TV programs in history with a client list that includes Hollywood studios, major nonprofit organizations, and many of the most respected churches and ministries worldwide. I'm familiar with a lot of these myself personally. His latest book is Ideas on a Deadline, How to Be Creative When the Clock is Ticking, and he's been called one of the most innovative communicators of our generation. Welcome, Phil Cooke. Thank you for being on the call with me today.
Thank you, Rob. I'm thrilled to be here. This will be fun.
This is going to be exciting. It's been a little while, but I'm so glad to be connecting, and I'm really glad to see what you are doing in not just the faith community, but also the secular community through media. And I wanted to ask you, because this is actually a question I've always wanted to know: how did you get into media? When did you first realize this was your passion and this is what you want to do?
It's interesting. My dad was a pastor, and I grew up as a preacher's kid. So I played piano. That was a job requirement back then for being a preacher's kid. And I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. But my dad had a Super 8 movie camera. That tells you how old I am. Remember those 3-minute rolls in a Super 8 film camera? And I had a bunch of buddies that we would go out and make movies. And we had no thought that you could do this for a living. Never crossed our mind. But we made mafia movies, army movies, war movies, whatever you want. And when I went away to college, it's funny, I still didn't think you could do this for a living, but I went away to college 1,000 miles away. And I thought, well, I'll take my dad's camera and I'll take my movies and I'll see if I can find other guys at college that want to do this sort of thing. And so literally the first day of school, I'm, unpacking my suitcases, and a couple of my films rolled out of the suitcase. And a guy across the hall said, "Hey, I'm taking a film class. I can show you how to edit your films." Oh, wow. And I had no idea you could even cut film. That's how ignorant I was. And we went down that very night to the film department at the university and worked till late in the evening. And as we were wrapping up, I discovered the professor had been there all along, and he was watching from a back room, working on a project of his own. And as he left, he stopped, introduced himself, and said, "I've been watching your little movie out of the corner of my eye." And he said, "I've got students that have been taking for 2 or 3 years. They've been taking classes for years and still don't do this well." Wow. He said, "Would you mind if I showed your little movie in my class tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, sure, if I can sit on the back row and see what happens." So I did. The next day I showed up in class. I threaded the projector, showed my movie, sat on the back row. And it was interesting that and trust me, it was not, Rob, a great film, but by any means. But when it was over, they discussed it. They had this conversation about the movie. And this thought hit me, this crystal clear moment of revelation that I don't think I've ever had before since, that if I can do something with a camera that makes people talk like this, that's what I'm supposed to do with my life. And so I literally changed my major that day to film and television, and I've never looked back.
Did you think that you'd be using this as a platform for the faith community, or did you jump into it thinking, okay, this was going to be more of a secular venture, or were you not sure at that time?
And I wasn't really sure, but I thought Hollywood was the place for me. I thought I would come, do secular movies, do projects like that. I started out doing some television commercials. I mean, it was in Oklahoma. So, the first batch of things you do are hot tub commercials. That's all there is. And used car commercials for used cars.
Awesome.
When I was producing,
what was your first, you would consider like your first job? Like when you just broke into the industry, what was your first, like? It's
funny that I had been a camp counselor and a lifeguard in a Christian summer camp in North Carolina called Camp Lurecrest up at Lake Lure in the mountains of North Carolina. And the camp founder, who had been a pastor, also had been a singer in Hollywood. He was one of the Sons of the Pioneers, a famous Western singing group in Hollywood. He performed on more than 100 movie soundtracks as a background singer. And he had a Bolex 16 millimeter film camera from his days in Hollywood. And I was working with him. I didn't know anything about this. We started this conversation. He said, "Hey, why don't you take my camera, film this summer, and do me a promotional film to promote the camp. And so I did. And that was my first, it was about a 30-minute film. That was my first real legitimate job I ever had. And it ended up being my senior project, helping me graduate. And it got me super excited about what the possibilities were. I spent that whole summer lugging around this little 16 millimeter film camera, shooting everything in the world. So, it was not a glamorous beginning, but it worked.
What's the project that you thought, wow, I'm really in this thing now. We're actually getting some traction here. This is like, we're making some moves. We're making impacts,
It's interesting. I was working in the Midwest for a large television ministry at the time. We were doing primetime television specials. I started pushing sets around and setting lights and pulling cables, ended up running camera, ended up being an assistant director, and finally ended up directing that program a number of years later. And that was a great opportunity because I was working with Hollywood stars. They would bring in major directors, producers, makeup artists, just expert people to come in and work on this program. So I got started really working at a very, very high level. And when I was 36, a new generation came into that organization and ended up firing me. And so looking back, I realized it was God that fired me because I really did feel called to come to LA. But I can rationalize like the best in the business. Our kids were in a good school. We had a good church. We had our friends there. And I thought, maybe I can commute. Maybe I can put it off. Finally, I got fired. Now, looking back, I think it was God that fired me totally. And we moved to LA.
You're called there.
I was called to LA. Absolutely. And I kept putting it off. So I think, God took things into his own hands and finally fired me. And looking back, it was the best thing that ever happened. We launched our company, Cooke Media Group. Once I got on the street, people, the word started getting around. I started getting calls. I started getting hired. And we've had an opportunity to, like you say, film in 70 countries around the world. We've done some remarkable things. And it all started from being fired. So, hey, for anybody listening or watching today that gets fired or has been fired, that's not the end. That very often can be the launching pad that takes you to a whole
Man, I love that. Level. I love that. When man fires, God hires, right? So
that's pretty cool. Yeah.
So, I've always heard you talk about different things and different projects you've done, in times past on different levels in the faith community and also in the secular community. Is there any project in particular that you feel like, wow, this is probably one of the most, one of the most significant projects in terms of just fulfilling for you, or something that you're most interested in? What is the project, and not necessarily in terms of monetary or success, from a viewer standpoint, but is there a project that you actually enjoyed doing? You felt like, hey, this is one of the things, this is why I enjoy doing what I do.
Well, it's funny. I always tell people my favorite project is my next one, because I'm always trying to learn and grow and do something better. But looking back, about 20 years ago, we did a 1-hour television special for a major national ministry. They called us and asked us to do something totally different from what they were doing, that they wanted people who would never in a million years watch a program of theirs actually watch this show. And so we took them at their word. We opened it with a guy committing suicide in his car, and it was just amazing. And it was kind of a 1-hour music video combination, documentary combination, sermon-based thing. It was just, we cut it all together in a really unusual way. And the ministry ended up hating it. They hated it. And they said the guy that was number 2 at the ministry had to approve it. And he said, as long as I'm alive, this will never air. And he left the screener. Back in those days, we would send screening copies to clients on a VHS tape. And I'm told that he left the screener on his coffee table after watching it. He got disgusted and said, no, this is never going to work. Left the screener on his coffee table. His wife came in later, not knowing what it was, put it in the machine, watched it. And a friend inside the ministry told me that with tears in her eyes, she went to her husband and said, honey, people need to see this. I don't know what it is, but people need to see this. And so they aired the broadcast, and it generated, literally globally, it generated 1 million phone calls for salvation. So
amazing.
A show they hated. In fact, it was interesting. They aired it in countries overseas where it's actually illegal to air Christian programming, but they didn't know it was a Christian program, which was kind of cool. And it still generated, the LA Times reported that it generated 1 million calls for salvation. So that's probably the most successful program from that perspective. We've done Super Bowl commercials and all kind of things, but a show like that really reaches into the culture and impacts people in a way like that, that's really the heartbeat of what we do.
I love that. So, kind of jumping into this next part is, how important is it rather for the church ministries, faith people to be involved in media projects, podcasts, movies, films, commercials, and not just faith-based, which I think there's a tremendous place for faith-based film and, positive films. I think there's a huge opportunity, and I pray that we just capitalize and, maximize these opportunities. But in your opinion, what role should we play, and do we have a role to play in the world when it comes to media?
It's interesting. Film historians tell us that at the birth of the film industry, about 1898 to about 1914, the church actually produced more movies than Hollywood did.
That's amazing.
Early on, the church was extraordinarily active in making feature films. I was called to a church in Montclair, New Jersey, right across the Hudson from New York City. And it was a historic church built, I think, in 1910, 1911. And they were doing some remodeling. And when they blew out a back wall of the sanctuary, they discovered a giant 35 millimeter vintage film projector embedded in the wall. And they were baffled by it. And they did some research and discovered that back in between 1910 and about 1920 or 25, every Saturday night, they'd have movie night at the church. And they'd invite people from the community. They'd show, sometimes Christian movies, sometimes family movies, just all kinds of things. And it was a great outreach for the church. And later in the 30s, 40s, particularly in the 50s and 60s, the church churches generally nationwide pulled away from being involved in films and movies and television. And of course, we've seen what's stepped in to take its place. But
why do you say it is? Why do you think
I think a lot of it, the church started getting nervous about it. I think is a lot of filmmakers wanted to break the rules. And, it started with smoking and drinking. Okay. And there, we created the Protestant church created what was called the Hays Code, which was, that's why when you see an old I Love Lucy show, Lucy and Ricky are sleeping in separate beds, even though they're married. Same on Green Acres. Those old shows from the 60s, that was the remnant of the Hays Code, where they're trying to say, look, you can serve a whiskey in a cowboy movie, but you can't show them actually drinking it. They had a lot of rules like that. That's why Andy Griffith on the Andy Griffith Show smoked, but you only saw it in just a handful of episodes. He very rarely ever smoked on camera. So there was a lot of rules. And as more and more people wanted to break the rules, Hollywood's really pushing the limits of sex and pornography and violence and profanity, things like that. The church just got kind of cold feet, and they decided to back away and think, this wasn't for us. When the truth is, that's when we should have even made a bolder step, I think. And so today we find ourselves in a situation where we're losing our story in the media. We're losing I think we're seeing Christianity disappear from the culture because we're not telling that story in a powerful way. And the truth is, Rob, as you know, media is the language of today's culture. I mean, every teenager's got a cell phone. They're on social media. If you want to reach people today, that's the way to do it. And we're simply not doing a great job. It's funny, before the pandemic, I've been preaching this gospel of media for decades, but before the pandemic, I would have pastors tell me, Phil, I don't mind live streaming my service, but that's not real ministry. Well, I'll tell you, as soon as the pandemic hit and churches were locked down, they changed their tune. Right. And I think a lot of churches started to realize this media thing does matter. And I'm just hoping we can continue to carry that ball. Sorry, I didn't mean to go into a sermon.
No, that's great. No, this actually leads me into one of the questions that I had for you, because, I've been hearing this for years, and I know there's always the God factor. I believe in that 100%. If God wants to bless you, whether you have a website, whether you have a business card or not, if God wants to take you from here to there, he's able to do that, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, and if you're trying to communicate a message and you're trying to engage people and you're trying to make a difference, you're trying to get the gospel out there in creative ways, especially if you want to reach the younger generation. I used to say this all the time, and I used to hear this all the time, it's, the younger people, if you want to reach younger people, older people now. I'm talking about grandparents, because they have grandchildren are not, I'll tell you what, they are tuning in and syncing up with what's really going on. So having said that, seeing these trends that are not only going to continue with younger people, but also we're seeing trends where, grandparents, older generation, they're actually, syncing up because of the influence of their kids and grandkids. How important now is it for us to have a presence, especially on social media? And I'm not just talking about, the stuff we're picking our nose, and doing weird stuff and acting a fool, but I'm talking about, we're actually bringing, like you said, content that will captivate or bring emotion or cause someone to, thirst for God. How important is that to have a presence?
It's interesting, particularly after the pandemic. We're finding a generation of people that want to check you out online before they visit. I always tell pastors that the vast, vast majority of people today will check you out online before they come to visit. So why is your website so lame? I mean, if that's the case, which it is, your website, in many ways, your church website needs to be the best thing you do, because if that's what helps people decide whether I'm going to visit, that website needs to be amazing. And it's along with that, Rob, it's interesting that, I tell pastors, your website is not for your church members. Your church members never go to your website. They know who the pastor is. They know where the church is located. They know what time the service starts. But virtually 99% of new visitors will check it out before they come and visit. So it ought to be, your church website really ought to be designed around what would be so compelling to make people want to come and visit our church.
I've heard you talk about this before in different levels, and because really you said it, I think you've said it just this way as well. You said your website actually communicates to your audience, and so they're actually, they kind of judge you. I think you've said it like this before they even walk the door by, what they're seeing. You might have great content, you might be a great church, but your website may not reflect that. So, again, I think, for reaching out, like you said, that website's got to be on point, correct?
Well, it's interesting that a couple of years ago, Microsoft did an interesting study that indicates that we're so distracted. We live in such a distracted culture. I mean, we've got emails to answer, text messages to check. We're just so distracted that when we meet somebody new, we've actually changed our behavior so that when we meet someone for the first time, we decide what we think of that person in the first 4 to 8 seconds.
Wow.
So think about it. We haven't had time to really talk to them, know anything about them, learn much of, what they're doing. But hey, we've got other things to do. So we've changed our behavior, and that's not just meeting people, it's experiences, it's products, it's events. And so in that world, in that 8-second world, I tell pastors, I'm glad your sermon's anointed. I'm glad your worship music is fantastic. But in an 8-second world, what's the parking experience like at your church? Wow. What does the lobby look like? Who's the first person a new visitor meets when they walk in the door? Because we just live in a world today where most people will have decided what they think of your church before they even get to their seat. So we have to be thinking, if we really want to respond to the culture and engage people today, we have to be thinking like that if we're going to be successful.
I love that. So are there some resources, even if there's some of your own? And I have been following you on LinkedIn now. I didn't even realize I've just been now upping my LinkedIn. You've got some great 2-minute reads, 3-minute reads, 5 to 6-minute reads on some really practical stuff that I think, even like you just did one on, how to properly introduce a public speaker.
Yes.
Which I think, this is some great nuggets, for people that are dealing with, digital footprint or digital world. So what are some resources like for people that may not have any clue, any idea of how to break into, social media and ways of, leveraging social media to help their church or their ministry get the word out there or communicate some sort of message? Is there a book? Was there a course?
Sure. It's really funny you mentioned my blog, which is philcooke.com. I'm Cooke with an E, by the way. So PHILCOOKE, philcooke.com. I write every day about all these kind of issues that church leaders, pastors, and secular leaders as well have to deal with, really about communicating your message in today's culture, how to get it out there. And so I'm always writing about those kind of things on my blog. I have a newsletter that you can get for free, which are my top stories every week.
I get that. I get it.
During the pandemic, I wrote a book called Maximize Your Influence, How to Make Digital Media Work for Your Church, Your Ministry, and You. And I really wrote it for pastors and leaders, not for the tech guys, not for the media guys. I wrote it for pastors and leaders. It's from their perspective, not only what I should be doing, but why I should be doing it. And it really goes more into focusing on what pastors are concerned about, how to get their message out there. So it covers everything from your website, social media, short videos, book publishing, even speaking to a digital audience. I think there's a lot to be said for the fact that we're speaking to a different audience than we were 20 years ago and even 10 years ago. And we need to take that into consideration if we're going to engage them properly. So maximize your influence. So you can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever. But I think that's a real tool I created just to help pastors. I would love that to be on every pastor's desk in America, because all the questions they call me about or they email me about, I cover in that book, and it's a really important tool.
I love that. So I guess if a pastor could benefit from this, another ministry could benefit from this, even an individual, because I'm sure the principles are relatively, I guess you could cross-pollinate some of these ideas, correct?
Absolutely. It's funny. I'm speaking more, in many ways, I'm speaking more to marketplace leaders, business leaders these days than I am to pastors and church leaders. I was in Brazil, where I spoke to 7,000 marketplace leaders just a few weeks ago. And I mean, these were major, major companies. One guy was the founder of an agricultural company. He owns 25 jets. I mean, massive companies. And so I'm going to Canada next month to speak to a large gathering of marketplace leaders in Winnipeg, and then in Vancouver in December. And so
what is the message when you go to these places? What is the theme, or is it different in most places? But is there a central theme when you're walking into these environments? I mean, what do they bring you in to say?
Well, there's a couple different things. One is kind of giving them an idea of the world we live in today. Why is it that your message is not getting out there? Why we're not communicating with customers or congregation or the general public? What's causing that problem? Because the world has definitely changed, and we need to understand how social media fits that, how video, TV, broadcast, all these things fit that. So I'll give them an idea of really how to break through all that clutter. Part of it is some researchers indicate that the average person sees about 10,000 media messages every single day. In many ways, we're literally overwhelmed with media messages. So let me give you a great example. If you took all the information that was created since the beginning of time up until the year 2000, all the writing, art, design, data, math, all the information that's ever been created from the beginning of time up till 2000, now we create that amount of information every 2 days. So we're literally an AI, artificial intelligence is going to make it even worse. So we're literally bombarded with information. And so the question is not who has the best message. The question is who knows how to cut through all that clutter, all that garbage, and get their message heard. And that's a big part of why I'm brought in to consult with churches and businesses and leaders these days. It's kind of interesting too. A lot of people call me to help them lead creative people. One of the big things we have to think about as leaders today is if we're going to get our message, our product, whatever out there, we need to work with creative people. We need to have graphic designers, video people, web designers. So leaders, it's funny. There's been so much information about leadership in the last 20 years, John Maxwell being one of the greats, but there's not a whole lot about leading creative people. And, us creative people, we're a little different animal. And how do you inspire and motivate that team? Because they're the ones that are going to help get your message out there to the world.
That's fantastic. How important is it to engage younger people when it comes to a team standpoint? I mean, I know you don't just hire young people just for the sake of hiring young people and how they've been respected, but is there a value to bringing the younger generation in to help with what you're doing currently?
Absolutely. No question about it. In fact, I'm really big on diversity, and not in the way we normally think. That it's become kind of a trendy word. But real, true diversity is not just racial diversity. It's men, women, old, young, different cultural backgrounds, different experiences, different educational levels. I like creating a team that really comes from a lot of different places because they're going to see things. I've been on many film shoots, for instance, where I was on the set, 30 people standing around waiting for me to make my decision, and I was stumped about something, could not figure out a creative solution to the problem. And I remember one time it was the youngest person on the crew that had the idea that saved the day. So you just never know. They see things that, someone at my age is not going to see. They notice things. They know what's trendy and what's not. And so I think particularly churches or businesses that don't listen to the younger people on their team, they're missing an enormous amount of perspective just on what reaching this young generation takes. I think that's always important. And by the same token, I want older people on my team. All people that have been through the fire, emerged on the other side. They've had the experience. I want to get the veterans on things.
Bringing them both together. You feel like it's good. I like having them both. I think isn't that great? For sure.
It's funny. I visited a church the other day that has a contemporary service at 9:00 for the young people and an 11:00 service for the traditional folks. And, the 11:00 service has the choir and they sing hymns. The contemporary service at 9, they do all the, up-to-date music, and it's much more hip and cool. And the way they've structured it, the young people and the old people never worship together. They never cross paths. The old people come and leave. Then, the young people come and leave. Then the old people come. And it's just a tragedy that this church.
You're leaving diamonds, right?
It's not this time.
People, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Crazy.
they're just missing the power of mixing those two cultures, and I think that's so important.
You know, you brought up something just a minute ago. You mentioned AI. I am actually not afraid of it at all. I think AI is actually marvelous, fantastic if you're using it correctly. And in my personal opinion, is I don't feel like AI is going to replace people. I think what AI is going to do is replace people who are not using AI. In my opinion, but in the faith space, is there a space in the faith space for artificial intelligence? When it, you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that we have a long way to go before it's perfected. Certainly right now, a lot of major novelists like Stephen King are suing ChatGPT because, one of the ways artificial intelligence gets its information, it scans everything. And so that means it's scanning the New York Times, it's scanning the LA Times, the Wall Street Journal, it's scanning major books. And that's where they're getting all this information. So one of the worries I have is if I use it, and I've experimented with it a lot, when I use it, I want to be careful it's not plagiarizing somebody because it's pulling from a lot of different places and I don't know where it's pulling from. So that's a concern. But I use it in the research stage for my blogs and other things. I'll often ask it, what are the top 3 things I need to know about this or that? And it's really quite amazing. I actually asked it to write a TV commercial there was a fundraising commercial for an orphanage in Africa. And it was brilliant. I mean, it was amazing what it wrote. So I use it, but I always re-edit it because I don't know where it's from, but for the basic information, it's a great tool. I mean, it's a really, really great tool and saves me hours and hours of research. So I can't deny it, but I just would caution, particularly ministry leaders, don't get lazy and let it write your sermon.
Of course.
Don't get lazy and let it write your Bible teaching. One of the things I've noticed with GPT especially is it's a little left wing. It's a little biased toward the left. And so I have to be very careful what it thinks, how it's describing something. And so it's going to be polarized. It's going to have some political tones in there. It's going to be a little woke. So we just have to keep that in mind and always be on our guard when we use it. But I like you, I'm all for stepping into that arena and seeing what the potential is.
How about when it comes to even like the editing space, some of the creative space? How do you feel about that? I mean, I personally don't feel like, I just don't see how an artificial brain could ever override the creative power of a human brain that God made, But do you feel like, there are certain applications I feel like, if you can get 3 hours of editing done in 30 minutes, what a great resource in terms of application like that. Do you feel like there is applications in the editing realm, in the film realm for AI, or are we getting kind of crazy at this point now?
Oh, there is. No, there is. In fact, it's interesting. We just went through the Writers Guild strike here in Hollywood for that very reason. That was one of the big key reasons for the Writers Guild strike. They were worried about AI taking their job. Why do we need writers if we can write scripts based on artificial intelligence? And they're pretty remarkable. And I think that the challenge for us as creative people is we have to constantly be raising the bar. We have to constantly be working and be unique. I mean, I think that I'm a big believer that there is no voice like yours. I mean, when I talk to creative people, I always tell them that your story matters and your story needs to shape everything you do because nobody else has your background. Nobody else has been through what you've been through. Nobody else has wrestled with the issues you've wrestled with. Nobody else struggled to get where you've gotten to. And yet every day I see people who never use that in the creation of what they do. Salesmen who never use their background or their unique, personality to help them sell cars, or writers who never use their unique background to give them a better perspective on scripts or books they're writing. I'm just a big believer that whatever your story is, people need to hear it. No matter how boring you may think it is, somebody out there needs to hear it. And we need to start integrating our story into what we do. And when we do that, there is nothing like it on the planet. And AI can't duplicate you. Nobody can duplicate you because we're all unique.
I love that. In terms of, and you're much more informed than I am when it comes to this, but when it comes to video versus a static picture, just a picture, what are the probabilities? Because I talk about this to pastors all the time, ministers, and different folks that I'm trying to encourage to leverage especially free social media platforms that you actually do get quite a bit of traction if you use it correctly, for free, and it's easily shareable. Do you see? And again, I don't want to say social media is the answer. I want to make sure I'm very clear about this. I'm not saying, hey, if I go by social media, I'm going to have this impactful ministry. I feel like if you have an impactful ministry, your social media will grow, naturally and organically. But having said that, if you've got a great message, like you said, and which we all do, is it going to be more accessible and more read when it comes to an article and a blog or a video? Or today, should we be doing both?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'm doing both. I certainly write my blog. I write my books. I also, I'm on social media quite frequently. So I think there's a little bit of both. And I think that, what is important to say here and understand is that social media doesn't take the place of your message. It doesn't take the place of your teaching. Your teaching still has to be amazing. I mean, I don't care how many social media platforms you have. If your sermon stinks, it's not going to grow. It's not going to grow.
That's right.
So we still have to do our homework. We still have to be amazing in the pulpit or in the executive suite, wherever we are as leaders. We still have to be amazing. But what social media does is give us a gateway to potentially millions of people who would never know about our message, never know about us. I'm just constantly amazed at the people around the world that will reach out to me or comment on some of my social media posts, who would have never been able to do that had it not been for Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or X, as it's called now, or some of these other platforms. So it's just a powerful tool for amplifying your voice. That's really the word we need to talk about.
I love that.
Amplifies the voice you already have. Your voice needs to be great. My books, if, you mentioned Ideas on a Deadline, my book on creativity. If this book stinks, I don't care how much I promote it on social media. It's
absolutely
never going to work. So we still have to do good work and then use social media as a way to amplify that.
So if you could maybe just quickly, if there's someone watching right now and they've never been able to really take the plunge, they've got a great message, they've got a great voice, they might even have video. And I know people like this that have great video, they've got great editing, but they haven't really moved into the social media arena. How important, I mean, what would you give a pastor who said, look, I want to expand my ministry, I want to grow my ministry? Would you include, hey, you might want to consider, engaging the social media platform to get your message out there? Or would you say, hey, go buy more airtime?
No, I think that, first of all, you need to be active in social media. And here's the thing. I don't force pastors or leaders to get involved. If they don't feel comfortable with it, fine. But I would encourage you to stick your toe in the water. Try it out. Get one platform and just start posting on a fairly regular basis. And the thing is, it's not about self-promotion all the time. You're not, marketing your church. You're not marketing your books or your sermons or whatever. Just engage with people. We forget sometimes that social media is social. And a lot of the pastors I deal with will post something and then walk away. And they never engage with the people that respond to that post. And I'm a big believer that you need to go back. And if somebody responds to something you said on social media, talk to them, engage with them a little bit. Man, they love that. They go crazy over that. So that, in fact, here in Hollywood, whenever I talk to an influencer, somebody that has millions of followers, invariably they'll tell me, Phil, I don't post on social media unless I have 30 minutes to an hour afterwards to respond to people who are responding to my post, because I want to have a conversation. You wonder why they have millions of followers and why they're influencing so many people. It's because they take the time to engage with those people, talk with those people, and make it a social event. So that's a real key. It's not just about posting stuff and walking away. It's really about trying to start conversations online with people that, and I don't know, there's just so many ways. We don't have time in a podcast to talk about all the ways that you can use social media to grow your church and reach out to people and get your message out there. But it is a powerful tool, and I at least urge people to check it out, try it, see how you feel.
I love this. I know we're getting close to the end here, and I want to just be respectful of your time, and I really do appreciate your time today. This is really, really encouraging to me. I know you have dealt with a lot of people, and I don't want to say this or come across in a negative stance. I'm actually want to posture this correctly. They want to fly out to LA. Everybody's supposed to get out to LA to make a movie. Everyone's supposed to get, and I'm not against that. I mean, if God's called people to go out there, and I know he does. I know 100% he does. He's called you. He's called many others. But do we have to go to LA? Do we have to live in Hollywood to make an impact in the movie industry? Do we have to move to LA to break into making commercials in the secular arena? Do we have to live in Hollywood to get our dream cooking? Is that the only way to make it? Because I hear some people say, if I don't move to Los Angeles, I can't make it. I'm never gonna have a name. Is that a fallacy or is that a truth?
It's a little bit of both. The truth is, you don't have to move to LA. I mean, you can start anywhere. I started in Oklahoma. Other people I know, I have friends that started in Atlanta or Charlotte, North Carolina, or Tulsa or Tampa, where you are. I think it's a matter of just starting wherever you are. Now, there's a certain level here in Hollywood. If you're going to make $20 million Marvel movies, you probably need to be here because the studios, you're meeting with the studios on a regular basis. And there is something about running into somebody at Starbucks who can really help your career. And those things do happen. And there's certainly a community here of people that are trying to help each other succeed. However, the world is flattened so much that there are projects being made in Nashville and Dallas and Atlanta, just all over the place. I shoot commercials and TV programs all over the world. So there's no question that it's more an issue of funding. How can you find money to do the project you want to do? But my real word is start. So many people I meet, Rob, will say, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to make a movie, or I'm going to do this, but I'm just waiting to meet an agent. I'm waiting to interview, to find a studio. I'm waiting to meet a producer. I'm waiting to meet somebody that can open the door for me. No. Stop waiting. Start. Because when you meet that producer, you're going to have something to show him. When you meet that agent, you're going to have something to show him or her. So it's important that you start now. Start writing, start thinking, start putting together your team. Some of the most successful filmmakers I know have rarely been to Hollywood. They're in places like Alabama. They're in places like Tennessee. They're in places like North Carolina. So there's no question you can be anywhere you want and start at some point. If you feel, your job is to move, great. And even if you feel now that you really genuinely feel called to come to LA, great. But it's certainly not a requirement anymore.
I love it. And the last question I want to bring to you, when it comes to the faith space, are we as believers, do you see a trend in terms of quality and excellence with movies, media? Have we turned the corner? Are we turning the corner in terms of quality? Or are we still stuck? I mean, in your opinion, how are we doing as believers in terms of making an impact in the entertainment industry?
I've spent my whole career helping Christians not suck at the media, to be perfectly frank. And it's been an uphill slog, Rob, as you know. It's been an uphill slog. But I do believe we've turned a really significant corner. I think that we're seeing some amazing things out there. We're seeing movies made by Christians today that are winning at the box office here in Hollywood. We're seeing major Hollywood studios now have faith-based divisions. They understand that there's a market of people out there that take their faith seriously, and they want to see entertainment that takes their faith seriously. And so my thing is, whether you want to go in the secular world or whether you want to do explicitly Christian things. I mean, on my cable system, I have DirecTV, and we have channels on, cars. We have channels on cooking. We have channels on real estate. We have channels on being gay. We have channels on being everything. So there's no problem. Why shouldn't we have a channel on how to be a better Christian?
Love it.
So I don't mind having explicitly Christian media, but just make sure it's really, really good. Whatever you do, whether it's explicitly Christian or whether it's explicitly secular or you're trying to blend the two, just make it amazing. Make it something people really want to watch, and that'll change everything. So yes, I'm encouraged, and I would encourage Christians out there listening or watching that really feel called to do this sort of thing. There's some remarkable doors being opened, and people understand that quality matters, and they're doing some amazing things. So be encouraged. This is a great time to be producing right now.
I'm so glad to hear that. And is there a movie in particular that you could think of that has been produced recently that you would recommend?
Well, was it Voice of Freedom, the sex trafficking film?
Sound of Freedom.
Sound of Freedom, yeah. That Jim Caviezel just did was a great movie. It was a terrific movie. I mean, it made more money than anybody ever dreamed it would. They had a brilliant marketing campaign, first of all, but the movie was a terrific movie, extremely well done. And so it's a great example. If people haven't seen it, I'd encourage you to go out and see that film, because it's really a powerful movie, and it's a good example of how there are topics that, I want to do films and television programs that raging pagans will look at and think, wow, I don't know, I don't agree with that Christian stuff, but that's a great movie. I think that should be our goal. Let's make a great movie first, and then if we want to put a message in there about Christ or a message in there about faith, whatever, let's just make it seamless and make it work really well in the context of a movie that's already amazing.
I love this, Phil. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. This was fun.
Being with me today, man. What a great. I'm looking forward to seeing this and watching this myself. Thank you for being on Talk.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you.